Hello and welcome to the preview on the Fulhamish YouTube channel. My name's Elizabeth Barnard and today we're looking forward to Spurs' trip to the Cottage on Sunday. And I am delighted to be joined by Ricky from Last Word on Spurs. Ricky, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. In the world of Tottenham, it's always a soap opera and a drama, so happy to be with you.
Yeah, I must say I've seen quite a lot of Tottenham this season. Obviously with the Europa League games, they're always on TV and they're always on Sky on Sunday then. And yeah, it has seemed a little bit of a drama. I'd love to ask you about how it's felt to be a Spurs fan this season. Obviously, I think it's not controversial to say a very poor league season, but some bright spots in the cups. I was just thinking at the end of November when you guys beat City away, like 4-1 or whatever it was, and were absolutely unstoppable, I thought Spurs are going to barnstorm the league now. Hasn't quite worked out like this. What's gone wrong this season?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have shared your optimism, Liz, that I ever felt it was unstoppable. It's been a really, really tricky season in general. That, to be honest with you, hasn't really ever got going. I think, look, there were doubts for me personally around Ange going into the second season and whether he had the tools there to be able to do the job. And I think, look, the reality is that the squad was never deep enough to compete on all four fronts. And unfortunately, it's bared witness to that because of the nature of how Spurs have, over the course of the season, struggled to really find consistency in terms of their league form, the way they've crashed out of the cups, and also had at one point 13, 14, 15 senior players out at one point, which is unfathomable, really, how we get to that situation where we've had so many injuries for a second season in a row. And it's fair to say there's been a lot of question marks as to how those injuries have occurred. Is that due to the intensity of training? Is that just down to not having the right medical staff at the club, where the club have been advertised on LinkedIn for free positions for medical staff? So if we're going to be honest with you, at the moment, there's a real feeling amongst Spurs fans where we all just want to get to the end of the season and probably go on our summer holidays. But look, we could have a really, really amazing end to the season, of course, with the Europa League. But you mentioned the cups there. I mean, look, there's been some bright spots in terms of, you'd maybe say, the way in which we got to the semi-finals of the League Cup in terms of knocking out City. Of course, the journey we had along that journey. But at the same time, I think the way we went out to Liverpool by 4-0 in the second leg really, really hurt. And then the cup defeat to Aston Villa, where we conceded inside a minute of that FA Cup tie. It does feel like it's been a really tricky season. And look, to be fair, there's a lot of division right now in the Spurs fan base when it comes to, I'm sure you're going to ask me about him, Ange Postecoglou. Obviously, the fact that he made it very clear that when probed, he always wins a trophy in his second season. And that's kind of up the ante in terms of the Europa League and what that means for the rest of the season. So look, being honest with you, it's been a really, really tricky season. One that I think has split many fans about players, manager. There's a very much common theme now about where people feel about the boardroom at Tottenham and the hierarchy and what people's feelings are on that. So, as I said in my opening line, it's a bit of a soap opera, but it is life as a Tottenham fan. It's never a dull day, never a dull moment.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Ange, actually, because when he came into the Premier League a couple of years ago, it seemed like such a breath of fresh air. Obviously went on an incredible winning run at the beginning of that season. But having said that, it seems to have unraveled, and I'm slightly shocked, to be honest, that he's still in charge. What's your feelings about Ange's management? Do you want to see him continue? Do you want him to be sacked? And if he is sacked, who do you want to see take over?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good questions in there. The first one with regards to Ange is that, look, I think he's a nice human being. I think he really means well. I think Ange Postecoglou is the latest in a long line of Spurs managers that you see as they gradually age in the job over 12, 15, 18 months, what it does to them. And you spoke about Ange when he first started. I mean, that looks like a different person now to the one that we're seeing. He looks like he's really aged very quickly in his time at Tottenham, which is what it does to the best of them out there. Ask Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, Maurizio Pochettino, Nuno Espirito Santo, who's even there for a shorter time. Look, it's not all Ange Postecoglou's fault in regards to how this season has unravelled. But at the same time, I'd be lying if I said that I can see a long-term future under Postecoglou. I think when you look back and you mentioned it, that opening 10 games that we had and that unbeaten run where I know many thought Tottenham won the league in October of last season. we haven't ever quite got back to that consistency of form. We've never actually got to that point where we've gone on a unbeaten run or a string of 4, 5, 6 wins. So judging Ange's tenure at the moment, look, the reality is now we're in a situation where it's all on the Europa League. It's Europa League or bust. The game we had against, obviously, AZ, where we progressed, was billed as being the biggest game of Ange Postecoglou's tenure. And they will continue to be the biggest game of Ange Postecoglou's tenure until either Tottenham win it or they get knocked out. And just my gut feeling, I find it very, very hard to envisage him being the Spurs head coach next season, just given our position in the league and the reality of how we've performed over the course of the season. And just the fan feeling, I think there's a lot of fans that have been very sympathetic to Ange with regards to the amount of injuries that we've had. And I said what I said earlier in the show, that there's some that have felt that the injuries, to some degree, have they been dictated by the intensity of training and how much responsibility do you put on Ange for that, and how much do you put on the medical staff, again, by the fact that we don't seem to have a competent backroom there that are looking after the players, given that we're advertising 3 positions on LinkedIn and the head of medical walked out on Tottenham, earlier in the season. So, look, I wish nothing harm towards Ange. The great thing would be for me, he wins the Europa League and goes out with a bang. And I think the thing again with Ange is if he wins the Europa League with Tottenham, I think you've kind of completed, the game. Because, I don't know really what else he can achieve at Tottenham, with all due respect, I just think now, looking at the squad and looking at the table and looking at the other teams around us, look at Fulham, for example. I think there's been a gradual improvement with Fulham under Marco Silva, where you can see there's a progression there season upon season. And look, many might argue that it's not fair enough to judge Ange over an 18-month tenure for what it's been. But there's a feeling that I have seen enough to make a judgment that I don't really see a massive uplift in the 3rd season. But the thing is, look, if he wins the Europa League, how do you sack the most successful manager in what would be the last 17 years for Tottenham? So there's a lot of swings and roundabouts at the moment, Elizabeth, a lot of unanswered questions that will need to be answered, that I think we'll only get those answers when we come to the end of the season. So I don't think I've given you a straight answer there. Look, if I'll be honest with you, he's maybe not my man for the long term, but as long as Ange is here, I'm going to get behind him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And I do reflect on what you say about Fulham getting better year on year, because even though we've lost key players, we lost Mitrovic in our first summer and then Pelini last summer, we've been able to improve and build on it, and that's down to coaching. And there's a lot of concern amongst Fulham fans that if Ange is sacked, Marco Silva might be heading for North London.
I just come on that point, Liz. I personally don't think Marco Silva, how do I put this? I think Tottenham for him would be the wrong move to go in his career next. I just think the way Tottenham are as a football club and the way they spit up and chew out managers, I think Marco Silva, in my opinion, is deserving of an opportunity where he's going to get given the time to showcase what he has done over Fulham at a club that will give him, the right kind of tools to continue that. And I just think with Tottenham, and I've said this a lot when it comes to Spurs managers, that they're never given the tools in what they need to succeed at the job. And many would look, but you had Conte, you had Mourinho. Look, these guys, they were win-now managers. You didn't give them the win-now tools to win. So what was the point in bringing those managers in? So if I'm Marco Silva, and I'm not Marco Silva, I would be strongly suggesting he doesn't come to Tottenham. I just think that guy has rebuilt his career so much. And the reality is he's worked so hard to regain some real credibility in what he's done as a coach and his management style and his brand of football and the way he manages players. And as you said, the way he handles the adversity of losing his best player over a couple of seasons. I think there's a more befitting job out there for him than the Tottenham job, where hopefully he'll get given the tools to go on and continue his talent. Because I just feel with Tottenham in general, I think there's a lot on last word on Spurs. We've come to a point now where, in my opinion, it is actually, in my opinion, a job where it's impossible to be successful given the constraints you're working as under a manager. So if I'm Marco Silva, whilst I admire what he's done from the outside looking, I think, again, I rate him as a coach and how he's improved players. If I was his advisor, I'd be advising not to come to Tottenham.
Oh, okay. That's a big thing to say, especially for a club of Spurs' stature. But I do totally see where you're coming from with the the way that the squad spend is so much smaller than the net profits, right, and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the owners aren't necessarily showing that ambition that you want to see.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why, again, there's a lot of people that feel out there. It's now a business, and as fans, we just want football to be at the forefront priority, and it just feels at the moment that isn't the case. So that is why there's such, again, disenchantment in the fan base right now, because we've got a football club that we all dearly love, and again, similar to Fulham, it's a club that goes back many, many years with a loyal fan base, and we just want our football club back for the right reasons of being a club that wants to win and have football winning as the priority.
Yeah, no, I get that. Let's turn our attention to Sunday now. I'd love to ask about your squad. Obviously, you mentioned that this season you've been incredibly injury ravaged, but it seems in recent weeks that those players have been returning. What sort of state is the squad coming into the game on Sunday? And will you be affected by the tiredness from last night's Europa League game?
Yeah, I mean, look, the squad's in a better place than what it has been for the majority of the season. I always am concerned about talking about the squad, because when I always talk about them, someone else then goes down injured and suddenly there's another one to be piled up on. So at the moment, going into the fixture, the only couple of big major absentees for Spurs, I would even trying to count them on one hand if I can. You've got Richarlison, you've got Kevin Danso, and you've also got, who's gone right in my mind, Dejan Kulusevski, Spurs' player of the season so far. So those are the three that are out at the moment. Obviously, Ange will give us an update in terms of anything else, because there was suggestions that some players were holding their hamstrings, Mickey being one of them, coming off against AZ. But you never really know the fallout with Tottenham until either the day before the game when Ange does the presser, or at the game when you suddenly see a player's not there and something's happened and you're having to decipher what has gone on. So, yeah, I think that's the only thing that at the moment, to be honest with you, there's some uncertainty. I wouldn't want to sit here for certain and say this player's fit or we've got this player back, because you just don't know with Tottenham. But we're probably in the best place we've been for a lot of the season in terms of having the core squad back. In terms of tiredness and how that works out, look, I mean, the reality is Spurs haven't fared well after Europa League games. It is just the case. And also, let's be honest about it now, it does feel like Tottenham's season relies on the Europa League. We're in a position now on the table where we are, and I'm sorry, Liz, I can't bear looking at the table, if I'm being honest with you. I've tried to kind of in my mind erase what that table looks like, because I feel like I'm so disillusioned that I'm looking at the table the wrong side, upside down. I think we're kind of 8, 9, 10 points away now from mid-table. So it feels really like we're just going to be on the beach, in that analogy, towards the end of the season. We're not going to get relegated. We're not going to get Europe. We have got, an opportunity to maybe finish mid-table. The board will want Tottenham to keep on pushing on, because obviously the higher the table you go up, the more money that obviously means for where you finish. But it feels like now really we're just kind of playing out games to get to the next Europa League game at the moment, which sounds a bizarre mentality, but that's what Tottenham have become this season, really.
Yeah, I get that. So the Europa League is definitely the priority, it seems, over the Premier League at this point, at least in fans' minds.
Yeah, it's all or bust, isn't it, really? I mean, like I say, if it's a crazy season, Elizabeth. It's been a crazy season. I can't believe the way I'm talking, really. We've got 10 Premier League games to go, and I'm talking as if it's done, but Tottenham won't get in the European places, and they certainly, at the moment, it seems, won't get relegated, because there's 3 worst teams in the league somehow this season, which again is quite crazy when I look at the fact we've lost 17 games overall, which is crazy for a club of Tottenham's stature.
Yeah, no, definitely. I wanted to ask about where Spurs can hurt Fulham on Sunday. Your most dangerous players. Obviously, you mentioned Kulusevski being out. That's a big relief, I think, for Fulham fans, because from the Spurs games I've seen, he's definitely been the most dangerous player this season. But you have got some really decent players in your side, some really strong attackers especially. So tell me about who's going to hurt Fulham on Sunday.
Yeah, look, if we play the way we can play, then we have got players that can hurt anybody. Maddison's pretty much been in good form for Tottenham recently. Scored again, obviously, in the Europa League. A player that can show the ability to turn it on when possible. Be interesting to see, obviously, how he does react to the fact he's been left out of the latest England squad, because, again, with Maddison, he feels like a player that does seem to perform well when the England squad is on the horizon, and when it's no longer there, seems to dip. Dominic Solanke has been called up, and I think Dominic played very well for Spurs this season. Hasn't scored since January, but has been injured for quite a sustained period in that, obviously, bubble in between. Jed Spencer's also been a really good player for Tottenham this season. I think many one that would be surprised that he's not been in Thomas Tuchel's first England squad. So there's some players in that can definitely hurt Fulham for sure. look, Wilson Odebear had a really good game as well against AZ Alkmaar. So, the forward line of Tottenham can hurt teams when they're on song. The problem is, Elizabeth, you just don't know what Tottenham is going to turn up. I remember going to Fulham last season at Craven Cottage and they just blew us away. You guys obliterated us on the day. And to be fair, I think there was a lot of people from that moment that really felt that's kind of where the second half season started to unravel, because I think we played you guys a week after we beat Aston Villa 4-1 away. And there was a real feeling that Tottenham at that point were kind of going to get the top four. And that Fulham result brought us crashing down to earth. It was such a poor performance. And again, we never really recovered from that point in the second half of the season to really be able to do anything. So, look, Fulham will not be easy. I think you've given everybody a game really at Craven Cottage. And, with all due respect, you have to respect the team that you're facing there, because Fulham are a side that I think under Silva have started to make Craven Cottage quite a real place to really go and get a result hard now. I think it's really hard to go and get a result at Craven Cottage because of how Marco Silva has built the team. So wouldn't say it's an easy game, but the way Tottenham are at the moment, because there's nothing on it, you just don't know how they're going to turn up. But like I've said, our form after the Europa League games hasn't been that great. So it's hard to really be too optimistic given the form after Europa League games.
Yeah, I think playing this Ange side at home certainly suits us. I wonder whether you'll agree with this, but Fulham this season at home, when we struggled against teams that have really sat back and tried to absorb pressure. So
Tottenham won't do that.
Yeah, we drew with Southampton.
Yeah.
We lost to Manchester United at home when they were terrible. I mean, they've been terrible all season. We drew with Ipswich at home. We lost to Wolves at home, all that. But when teams have come and tried to play us, like when Newcastle beat the Cottage, for example, we've been able to beat them quite comprehensively.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that Sunday will be another example of that. Do you think that my hope is accurate?
I would think so, because people won't like me for saying this, those that are Tottenham fans, if they're listening into this, that Ange doesn't really adapt too far away from how he wants to play. Look, you could argue he's not really played Ange well, actually, for the last couple of months, but the Brentford game away, there was a little bit of a different element to that, where we did seem to sit back and soak up the opposition and hit them on the counter. Mm-hmm. The thing with that game is that we had, about 13, 14 senior players missing. The thing now is that he's got pretty much a lot of his squad back, and you would imagine Ange would like Tottenham to treat the game in terms of trying to take control of it and really giving it a good go. So I would imagine your kind of feeling around it is right. I would imagine Tottenham will want to take the game to Fulham. If that's the case, it's going to be the perfect game plan for Fulham. They'll want to exploit us. They'll hit us on the counter attack. And again, the problem for Spurs is there's not a huge amount riding on this. And the thing with these kind of games is that Fulham really, they're going to want this more. That's my worry. Fulham will want it more, because for them, there's an opportunity to still secure a European place, Conference League maybe as well. So for Tottenham, as I've said, there's not a huge amount to playing in the Premier League. And it is just a case now where, Tottenham have already got one eye on Frankfurt in the next round of, obviously, the Europa League. So, really not sure how this is going to go, to be honest with you. I'm really struggling to see how Tottenham get a win at Fulham. They might nick a point, but I'd make Fulham strong favourites for this one, given where the two teams are at this point in the season and what they've got to play for.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me on very nicely to a score prediction. I'd love to hear how you think this one's going to play out.
Yeah, look, it's not me being negative, but we haven't had a great run of results after Europa League games. So I'd love to sit and say Tottenham are going to win it. You just don't know with Spurs. You really don't know. Would I be surprised if they won it? And a little bit, because Fulham have been a good side at home. I will say a 1-1, an optimistic 1-1 that we're going to hopefully, get back on track to some degree in the Premier League, where that looks like now in our position at the table, which, I can't bear to look at. But it wouldn't surprise me to see Fulham win the game. So I can either see a Fulham win or a Spurs draw. I'll say a Spurs draw just to be a little bit optimistic and positive.
Yeah, I'm going to say 3-1 to Fulham. I usually predict quite negatively and I'm a bit cautious, but I just feel like the way that Ange sets up will really favour Fulham on Sunday, especially with the tiredness of the Europa League. And it's not by any means, because Fulham have played some absolute stinkers this season, but I've just got a really, really good feeling about this one. Ricky, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And thank you so much for watching the preview.